is deeply concerned at the fact that there are still millions of women who don't protect themselves. The Princess of Wales will be patron of the campaign that will be run by a council of 11 charities and the Department of Health. They'll spend some £2 million over the next 4 years, and their aim is to do away with a tragic situation which, as Peter Snow now reports,
Camilla is deaf and blind. Her eyes have no real pupils. And because she's lived the first 10 years of her life in a dark, silent world of her own, no one, even at this special school in East London, has been able to get through to her to tell her how to use her voice. Soon after Camilla's mother got pregnant, she came out in spots. Her doctor said it was a heat rash and nothing to worry about. Actually, it was German measles, a disease sometimes hardly noticed that can do terrible damage to unborn children in the early weeks of pregnancy. This year, there's been a German measles epidemic.
The scale of the problem is formidable. In 1978-79, and remember this year was like 79, between 78 and 79 there were 120 babies born damaged from rubella. And this isn't the end of it, because we don't know how many more there were that we've never discovered. We think we know about 2/3 of them. And there were 1,400 abortions in 78-79. Now this year has been rather like this. There will be hundreds of women...
There's another epidemic here.
Yes, there's another epidemic here. There will be hundreds of women who've had abortions because they've had rubella or think they've been in contact with it, and there will be many children born deformed.
Caring for these children is a highly specialist business. There are only 6 schools like this in the country. Paul is one of many such deaf and blind children who has suffered the further distress of being kept much of his life in a home mainly for the mentally handicapped, which has only helped to aggravate his own physical disabilities. The real ordeal faces these children and their parents after they leave school, when society is almost wholly unequipped to cope with their particular handicap.
What is so exceptionally tragic is that none of this need have happened. Not a single one of these children need have been born damaged. This is an entirely preventable disease.
Camilla's education alone will cost the state more than £250,000, when for just £1, Camilla's mother should have been vaccinated against German measles.
Okay, that's right, good girl. Right, just a quick prick. Just imagine I was just pricking you. Okay? And then all that happens. Okay, right. Good. Let's rub that.
The vaccine has been around since 1970.
And you have to remind him, because you're trying to teach him something, you have to remind him.
Margaret Beattie's case is typical. She's the mother of a 4-year-old deaf and blind child, Robert. She was well aware of the dangers of German measles, but no one had told her she could get immunized after she'd left school. No one at any of the clinics she attended ever suggested it. Margaret fell victim to the last big epidemic of German measles in 1978, when she was pregnant with Robert.
1, 2...
She and her husband are angry at the avoidable mistake that so drastically altered their lives and the prospect of their son leading any kind of useful life.
Now walk. You're walking. You're walking.
The problem with a lot of the children, because they are deaf and partially sighted, and therefore have difficulty to learn, they become very sort of insular. And so I think he's probably very happy, because in his own little world, it's when you try and push them out of their own little world that problems sort of come.
Good boy.
There are children who are very handicapped who lead independent lives. Some never do. We're very hopeful Rob will be one of the ones who leads the independent life.
I think the ultimate goal has got to be self-independence for him.
Good boy. Very good.
The only real communication is by touch. Hands are everything.
Now that's really good.
And the hope that just a faint sound or two may reach him through that massive microphone on his chest.
Very good boy. I think that's worth the reward of...
This is the unique family centre at Ealing, where a charity called Sense, which was set up specially to deal with the deaf-blind, teaches parents and children the skills to get through to each other.
If a person is deaf-blind, they can't rely on their hearing to find where they are, and neither can they rely on their sight to know where they are. So you've really got to think of those two things in combination, that it's a blind person without hearing
or a deaf person without sight. So it's obviously it's a devastating condition.
John finds that doesn't matter if it's a sort of token job.
Yes.
The main thing is he did job.
The Beatties are relatively lucky. They've the time and the money to drive down here all the way from Coventry, where there's no specialised care for the victims of German measles.
Education for deafblind children really does depend on where you live. Most deafblind children have to go to boarding school if it's appropriate deafblind unit education, or they have to go to the wrong school. Many deafblind children go to schools for mentally handicapped children, and that is wrong.
If you'd known that you had German measles and that you might have a handicapped child, would you have terminated that pregnancy?
Yes, definitely. I've worked with handicapped children, I've seen them, and I couldn't knowingly bring what could be a very severely handicapped child into the world. We are resentful that our lives have been so drastically changed by an avoidable mistake.
Good boy. Now sitting.
The vaccination that Margaret Beattie should have had is offered to teenage schoolgirls at the age of 11, and to other women of any age, provided they don't intend to get pregnant for at least 3 months. In America and Sweden, this inoculation is more or less compulsory for young girls. In Britain, persuasion is preferred to compulsion. But this has allowed some 3 or 4 million women of childbearing age to slip through the net. Hence tomorrow's government campaign to tighten up. A revealing study has just been done at 8 schools in the East London borough of Hackney. Of nearly 1,000 girls aged 12, 140, that's more than 1/8, failed to be vaccinated this year. The key to it all is the pink consent form that each girl is given to take home. If it's returned to the clerks, duly signed by a parent, then the vaccination against German measles can go ahead. But many of these forms get lost or overlooked by parents, and that's where many health authorities are content to leave it. This year, Hackney's clerks who do the sorting and counting sent a second pink form to those who'd failed to return the first, and it led to a 14% improvement in take-up. But that still left as many as 50 who consented but actually failed to be vaccinated on the day, because they were sick or otherwise absent. And then there were the 24 or so who said no.
When I got the phone to say, ask my mum whether I was taking my rubella or not, I took it home and she looked up a list of the injections that I had had when I was a baby, and she thought that I had already had my injection against rubella, but I hadn't.
Kim will now be vaccinated next year, just to be sure. But this is Debbie Bennett, and she certainly won't be vaccinated. Her case will be a prime target in tomorrow's campaign. It's not her that's the problem, it's her mother Valerie, who's adamantly opposed to vaccination.
I just think it's an absolute waste of time. I don't see any point in it at all. It wasn't known years ago, injections, rubella injections, this injection and everything. It just wasn't known. And there's been thousands and thousands of babies born, and they're all quite healthy. I've had 4 daughters, they're all quite healthy, no problem. They've had their children's ailments, measles, chickenpox, mumps, but they haven't been vaccinated against anything at all.
But just supposing one of your 4 daughters catches rubella during pregnancy and has a baby who is very seriously afflicted, how would you feel about that?
Well, you're supposing now, aren't you?
Of course, the chance is a very small one.
It is. Well, I can't look as far forward as that, unfortunately.
My name's Dr. Griffiths, and I'm talking to you today about rubella. What's rubella?
Is it a needle?
No, you got confused. You know what rubella itself is? What's rubella? German measles, that's right.
Drumming home the facts about German measles is to be the first priority for Hackney's health education team this coming year. They're sending doctors like Sian Griffiths to bring the urgent message to classes of first-year schoolgirls.
Well, it won't come up.
Their aim? To close the gap between the 85% vaccination rate they achieved this year and the magic 100% that should be possible next time.
Tell me, how many of you are scared of needles? Most of you, I think. But tell me, how many of you would actually have the injection now? Great, that's all of you. Good.
Dr. Griffiths knows that the real test will be the rigour with which she and her team follow up these first attempts at persuasion. And if Hackney, 13 years after the vaccination was first available, is just about getting its house in order, what sort of a state must much of the rest of the country be in, when local enthusiasm is often a lot less intense than this?
Well, I think it's not really good enough. There are about 84% of schoolgirls. That means that 1 in 5 is dodging out of the school vaccination campaign. We still have adult women becoming pregnant who are unprotected, even women who are having their 3rd and 4th child still unprotected. And this is an absolute scandal in 1983.
What do you say to someone like Mrs. Bennett that we heard from earlier, who makes the point that she, just on principle, doesn't believe in vaccination?
I think you said she had 4 teenage girls and none of them protected? Well, now, if one of those gets German measles in the early days of her pregnancy, Mrs. Bennett's grandchild has more than a 50% chance of being very badly damaged. And I'm sure Mrs. Bennett doesn't know what she's heading for. What I would do is bring her along to a school like this and show her some of these poor children. That would convince her.
But even if the sight of Camilla, struggling with her disabilities, did persuade people like Mrs. Bennett to change their minds, as long as some women slip through the net by accident or out of ignorance, more of these damaged children will go on testifying to our tragic failure.
And just to re-emphasize one of the main points in Peter's report, the vaccination against German measles is freely available to any woman of childbearing age who missed it at school. The only major stipulation that doctors make is that the woman mustn't be pregnant or thinking of becoming pregnant within 3 months. Now we're going back to rejoin...
It has been spurred